September 27, 1944. High above the Philippine Islands, Major Richard Bong squeezed the trigger of his P-38 Lightning. The twin-engine fighter shuddered as its 20-millimeter cannon and 4 machine guns unleashed a devastating burst into the belly of a Japanese bomber. Flames erupted from the enemy aircraft as it spiraled toward the jungle below. For most pilots, this would have been the moment of a lifetime. For Bong, it was Tuesday. This kill brought his total to 40 confirmed aerial victories, making him not just America's top ace, but the deadliest fighter pilot in the history of the United States military. Yet 6 months earlier, this farm boy from Wisconsin had been grounded by his own commanders, not for cowardice, but for being too aggressive, too reckless, and too dangerous to his own wingmen. The story of how a quiet Midwestern farmer's son became America's greatest aerial predator begins not in the skies over the Pacific, but in the wheat fields of Poplar, Wisconsin. Born in 1920, Richard Bong grew up in a world where aviation was still a novelty. Charles Lindbergh had crossed the Atlantic just 7 years before Bong's birth, and most Americans had never even seen an airplane up close. But young Dick Bong was different. While other boys played with toy soldiers, he carved model airplanes from wood scraps and dreamed of soaring through the clouds. His parents, Carl and Dora Bong, were hard-working Swedish immigrants who had built their farm from nothing. They expected their eldest son to follow in their footsteps, tending crops and raising livestock. But Dick had other plans. At Poplar High School, Bong was an unremarkable student, quiet and reserved, earning average grades and keeping mostly to himself. His teachers would later recall him as polite but unremarkable, the kind of boy who faded into the background. What they didn't know was that behind those calm blue eyes burned an obsession with flight. Every spare moment he devoured aviation magazines, studying the technical specifications of fighter planes and memorizing the exploits of World War I aces. When he graduated in 1938, his parents assumed he would stay on the farm. Instead, Bong shocked his family by announcing he was enrolling at Wisconsin State Teachers College to study engineering. But even that was just a stepping stone to his real goal, the Army Air Corps. In May 1941, 7 months before Pearl Harbor, Bong walked into an Army recruitment office in Minneapolis and volunteered for pilot training. The recruiting sergeant looked at this lanky 21-year-old farm boy, barely 5 feet 8 inches tall, and probably wondered if he had what it took to handle a fighter plane. Bong's physical appearance was deceiving. He possessed reflexes honed by years of hunting in Wisconsin's dense forests, eyes sharp enough to spot a deer through thick underbrush, and hands steady enough to thread a needle in a blizzard. More importantly, he had something that couldn't be taught, an intuitive understanding of three-dimensional movement that would prove invaluable in aerial combat. Basic flight training at Luke Field in Arizona revealed Bong's extraordinary natural ability. His instructors were amazed at how quickly he mastered complex maneuvers that took other cadets weeks to learn. But they also noticed something troubling. Bong had an alarming tendency to push aircraft to their absolute limits, testing every boundary, exploring every edge of the performance envelope. During one training exercise, he flew so low over a small Arizona town that he reportedly knocked laundry off clotheslines with his prop wash. Another time, he performed unauthorized aerobatics over his girlfriend's house, drawing a formal reprimand from his commanding officer. Despite these infractions, or perhaps because of them, Bong's superiors recognized his potential. In January 1942, just weeks after Pearl Harbor, he graduated from flight school as a second lieutenant and was assigned to Hamilton Field in California for advanced fighter training. It was here that Bong first climbed into the cockpit of a Lockheed P-38 Lightning, the aircraft that would make him a legend. The P-38 was unlike any fighter plane ever built. With its distinctive twin booms and central nacelle, it looked more like something from a science fiction movie than a weapon of war. But in the hands of a skilled pilot, it was devastating. The Lightning was fast, climbing to 25,000 feet in under 7 minutes and capable of speeds exceeding 400 miles per hour in level flight. Its twin Allison engines gave it the power to outrun most enemy fighters, while its concentrated nose armament, one 20mm cannon and 450 caliber machine guns, could destroy any aircraft with a single well-placed burst. Most importantly for a pilot like Bong, it was stable enough to serve as a steady gun platform while being agile enough to outmaneuver enemy fighters in a dogfight. But mastering the P-38 required more than just flying skill. It demanded a deep understanding of energy management, the art of using altitude, speed, and aircraft positioning to gain tactical advantage over an opponent. Bong studied these concepts with the same intensity he had once devoted to his model airplanes, spending hours analyzing combat reports from Europe and developing his own theories about aerial warfare. His fellow pilots began to notice that Bong approached flying differently than anyone else. While they saw it as a job or even an adventure, Bong treated it as a science, constantly experimenting with new techniques and tactics. In September 1942, Bong received orders that would change his life forever. He was being shipped to the 5th Air Force in the Southwest Pacific, specifically to the 49th Fighter Group operating out of Australia. General Douglas MacArthur's island-hopping campaign was just beginning, and American forces desperately needed experienced fighter pilots to contest Japanese air superiority over New Guinea and the surrounding islands. For Bong, it was the opportunity he had been waiting for his entire life. The journey to Australia took 3 weeks, giving Bong time to study intelligence reports about Japanese fighter tactics and aircraft capabilities. What he learned was sobering. The Japanese Zero was lighter and more maneuverable than the P-38, with experienced pilots who had been fighting in China for years before Pearl Harbor. American pilots were arriving in theater with perhaps 200 hours of flight time, while their Japanese counterparts often had over 1,000 hours of combat experience. The odds were not in America's favor. When Bong arrived at his new base in December 1942, he found a demoralized unit that had been taking heavy casualties. The 49th Fighter Group had lost more than half its original pilots, and morale was at rock bottom. Many of the surviving airmen were convinced that Japanese aircraft and pilots were simply superior to anything America could field. Bong listened to their stories of failed missions and lost wingmen, but he wasn't discouraged. Instead, he saw opportunity. His first combat mission came on December 27, 1942, a bomber escort run over the Japanese stronghold at Rabaul. As the formation of B-24 Liberators droned toward their target, Bong scanned the sky with the methodical precision of a hunter. Years of tracking game through Wisconsin forests had taught him to notice the slightest movement, the smallest deviation from normal patterns. When a flight of Japanese Zeros dove out of the sun toward the bombers, Bong was ready. What happened next would be debated by aviation historians for decades. Some accounts describe a textbook intercept, with Bong positioning his Lightning perfectly to catch the lead Zero in a deadly crossfire. Others tell of a wild dogfight that ranged across 20 miles of sky, with Bong using every trick he had learned to outmaneuver his opponent. What everyone agrees on is the result. The Japanese fighter exploded in a ball of fire, and Major Richard Bong had claimed his first aerial victory. But that first kill was just the beginning of what would become the most remarkable string of aerial victories in American military history. Within weeks of his combat debut, Bong had developed a reputation among his squadron mates as something extraordinary. While other pilots celebrated surviving their missions, Bong was already planning his next hunt. He studied Japanese flight patterns like a chess master, analyzing his opponent's moves, memorizing their formations, their preferred attack angles, and most importantly, their weaknesses. The Japanese Zero, for all its legendary maneuverability, had fatal flaws that most American pilots failed to exploit. Its lightweight construction made it fragile, and its lack of armor meant that even a few well-placed rounds could bring it down. Bong realized that the key to defeating the Zero wasn't trying to outturn it in a dogfight, but using the P-38's superior speed and diving ability to control the engagement. He would climb high above enemy formations, use the Lightning's twin engines to build tremendous speed in a dive, make a single devastating attack pass, and then use that speed to climb back to altitude before the Zeros could respond. This hit-and-run tactic became Bong's signature, but it required split-second timing and nerves of steel. A pilot who hesitated even momentarily would find himself trapped in a turning fight with multiple enemy aircraft, a situation that had proven fatal for countless American airmen. Bong never hesitated. His fellow pilots watched in amazement as he would dive straight into formations of 6 or 8 Japanese fighters, pick off the leader with a burst that lasted less than 2 seconds, and disappear before the enemy could react. By March 1943, just 3 months after his first victory, Bong had shot down 8 Japanese aircraft. His commanding officers were taking notice, but not always for the right reasons. Bong's aggressive tactics were undeniably effective, but they were also dangerous to his wingmen. Fighter pilots were supposed to work in pairs, with each pilot covering his partner's blind spots and providing mutual support. Bong had a disturbing tendency to abandon his wingman when he spotted an opportunity for attack, leaving his partner to fend for himself while Bong pursued his prey. This reckless abandon came to a head during a mission over WWII in April 1943. Bong spotted a formation of Japanese bombers escorted by Zeros and immediately dove to attack, despite being outnumbered 10-1. His wingman, Lieutenant Thomas Lynch, followed reluctantly, knowing that Bong's impulsive attack had just turned what should have been a routine patrol into a death trap. In the chaos that followed, Lynch's P-38 took multiple hits from Japanese fighters while trying to keep up with Bong's wild maneuvering. Lynch managed to make it back to base with his aircraft shot full of holes, but he was furious. Confrontation between Bong and Lynch became legendary in the squadron. Lynch accused Bong of being a glory hound who cared more about his kill count than the safety of his wingmen. Bong, typically quiet and reserved on the ground, listened to the criticism without responding. But privately, he began to reconsider his tactics. He had always been a loner, more comfortable hunting by himself than working as part of a team. But he was beginning to realize that his individual success was coming at a cost to unit cohesion and pilot safety. The solution came from an unexpected source. Colonel Neil Kirby, the group commander, called Bong into his office and presented him with an ultimatum. Either learn to work as part of a team or be grounded indefinitely. But Kirby also offered Bong something unprecedented: the freedom to develop his own tactics and train other pilots in advanced aerial combat techniques. Essentially, Bong would become a roving instructor, free to join any mission where his expertise might be valuable, but with the specific responsibility of mentoring younger pilots and sharing his knowledge. This new role transformed Bong from a dangerous individualist into one of the most effective combat instructors in the Pacific Theater. He began flying with different squadrons, observing their techniques and sharing his own insights about Japanese tactics and aircraft capabilities. More importantly, he started developing a systematic approach to aerial combat that could be taught to other pilots. Bong's methods were based on patience, positioning, and precision, rather than the wild dogfighting that had characterized early Pacific air combat. His students learned to think of aerial combat as a 3-dimensional chess game, where altitude, speed, and position were more important than raw courage or flying skill. Bong taught them to study their enemies, to recognize the subtle differences between experienced and novice Japanese pilots, and to exploit those differences ruthlessly. He showed them how to use the P-38's unique characteristics to their advantage, how to coordinate attacks with their wingmen, and most importantly, how to survive long enough to become experienced themselves. The results were immediate and dramatic. Pilot losses in units where Bong served as an instructor dropped by more than half, while their kill ratios improved dramatically. Young pilots who had been struggling to survive their first few missions were suddenly shooting down experienced Japanese aces. Word of Bong's teaching method spread throughout the 5th Air Force, and commanders began requesting his services for their most difficult missions. But Bong's greatest contribution wasn't just as an instructor. Throughout 1943 and into 1944, he continued to add to his personal tally of aerial victories. Each kill was a masterclass in precision flying and tactical awareness. His fellow pilots began to study his gun camera footage like students analyzing a textbook, trying to understand how he consistently managed to position himself for the perfect shot. What they saw was a pilot who seemed to anticipate his opponent's moves before they made them, who could judge distances and deflection angles with uncanny accuracy, and who never wasted ammunition on low-percentage shots. By the summer of 1944, Bong had become something of a celebrity back home. Newspapers across America carried stories of the quiet farm boy from Wisconsin, who was single-handedly taking on the Japanese Air Force. Hollywood producers began approaching him about movie deals, and his hometown of Poplar organized parades in his honor. But fame sat uncomfortably on Bong's shoulders. He was still the same reserved, soft-spoken young man who had left Wisconsin 3 years earlier, uncomfortable with attention and more interested in perfecting his craft than basking in glory. The pressure was building in other ways as well. By late 1944, Bong had 38 confirmed kills, putting him within reach of the all-time American record of 40 victories. Every mission now carried the weight of history, and Bong felt the expectations of an entire nation riding on his shoulders. His letters home to his fiancée, Marjorie Vattendahl, revealed the strain he was under. He wrote about sleepless nights, about the faces of the enemy pilots he had killed, and about his growing desire to return home and start a normal life. But there was still work to be done in the Pacific, and Richard Bong was not the type of man to walk away from an unfinished job. On August 6, 1945, just months after achieving his 40th and final victory, Major Richard Bong was killed in a test flight accident over California. He was piloting a P-80 Shooting Star jet fighter, America's newest weapon in the ongoing arms race with enemy nations. The irony was cruel and inescapable. The man who had survived hundreds of combat missions against the most experienced fighter pilots in the world died not in battle, but in a routine test of peacetime technology. Bong's death sent shockwaves through the aviation community and across America. The quiet farm boy from Wisconsin had become more than just a pilot. He was a symbol of American ingenuity, courage, and determination. His 40 confirmed kills stood as a record that would never be broken, not because future pilots lacked skill or bravery, but because the nature of aerial warfare itself was changing. The age of the individual fighter ace was ending, replaced by guided missiles, radar-directed guns, and jet aircraft that fought at speeds and altitudes unimaginable during World War II. But Richard Bong's legacy extended far beyond his kill count. The tactics he developed, the training methods he pioneered, and the leadership principles he embodied became the foundation of American fighter doctrine for generations. The young pilots he mentored went on to become squadron commanders, test pilots, and aerospace engineers, carrying his lessons into the jet age and beyond. Today, every fighter pilot who climbs into the cockpit of an F-22 Raptor or F-35 Lightning inherits techniques first perfected by a Wisconsin farm boy flying a P-38 over the jungles of New Guinea. The mathematics of aerial warfare had been forever changed by one man's relentless pursuit of perfection. Richard Bong proved that in the hands of a master, Even a simple fighter plane could become an instrument of strategic importance, capable of shifting the balance of entire campaigns. His story reminds us that behind every great weapon, every technological marvel, every military victory, there stands an individual human being, shaped by humble beginnings, driven by quiet determination, and willing to risk everything for something greater than themselves.